Most of my political career, in the beginning it was ecology, the ecological dimension. By now, in our social democratic family, sustainability is in the heart and the DNA of what we do. And it is very much connected to democracy. Because especially democracy at the European level, because we're struggling, as you know, to convince people how important Europe is. Getting into a sustainable track will prove to be key to make sure that we safeguard Europe and our democracies. We have an excellent panel today. Next to me is Paul Nyrup Rasmussen. Of the three, I know him best, because Paul is not only the former Prime Minister of Denmark, but I learned to know him as the chair, the president of the PES. I was a young MEP at that time. But the last year we've worked intensively together on, you know, the one thing, the book, Sustainable Equality. Paul Magnet kept on saying that you have to read it. So he said it maybe 5 times in his speech that you need to read it. So we worked on it together. Luca, who's over there, and Paul were the 2 co-chairs of that excellent document, and we'll keep on working on that. Next to me, I've the honor to introduce you Pascal Lamy. I haven't had the honor, but I will have in the future, I'm quite sure, to work closely with him. He's a very important social democrat, former, I think, Director General of the WTO, but also a former Commissioner of Trade. And trade and sustainability are so much connected to each other. It's in my point of view, I don't see a future for trade unless it's a sustainable trade. We still wait for Claire. She's on her way, I think. What I wanted to do in this closing session of today is not give the 2 excellent gentlemen next to me the floor to give you an introduction. That might be extremely interesting, but it is your School of Democracy, and you've been all afternoon busy in the workshops. So I would want to go immediately to your work, and then the gentlemen will have all the time to respond to your questions and your feedback from the workshop. Is that okay for you? No objections? Yeah, we're a democracy, yeah, so. Let's start with the workshop on inequalities. And on my paper it says that Angelica Mestra? Yes. Mastro? Okay. Come on up.
Come closer. Come closer. Please, Angelica. This is for you.
So we've started by trying to understand how inequality affects people, and we have seen, thanks to various statistical inferences, that the more income inequality increases, the more health and social problems you will encounter in the society. And more inequality will result in a lower degree of social mobility, in less literacy, and more mental illnesses, but also in a more extensive presence of addictive behaviors such as gambling or drugs abuse, combined with higher levels of narcissism and anxiety about social status. So all these problems translated in the rise of populism, which is an issue which we've also tackled this morning, and the rise of populism is a consequence, in fact, of the ever-growing levels of inequality resulting from the policies adopted over the last 20 or 30 years. And so, going back to the question which was raised during our workshop, can we beat inequalities? The Independent Commission for Sustainable Equality redacted a report which aims precisely at reducing inequalities through a multifaceted approach. And the report, in fact, provides an alternative vision for Europe, a Europe which provides well-being for all and not for the few, by focusing on inclusive development while also paying attention to the green economy and social ecological progress. So the 5 pillars detected in the report to turn this into reality are power to the people, reshaping capitalism, social justice for all, social ecological progress, and enabling change. And these 5 pillars are then declined in 110 propositions. And so the answer to the question raised in our workshop is yes, we can beat inequalities, but we wanted to ask the speakers here today, but also everyone else here, how can we translate the sustainable equality strategy into something appealing for the people? And so how can we engage people in this kind of change? And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angelica. That was very clear to us, and you also took note of the book that you all should read. By now you should know. Okay, I start with Paul because it's also about sustainable equality, and then I'll pass on to Pascal.
Yeah, number one, I think, is to look what the real world looks like right now. I mean, every young people in Europe, everyone, and their parents and their grandparents, I think they are convinced that we cannot just go on like we've been doing for the last 20 years. It's not a game which is about, well, let's change a little bit here and a little bit there and hope for the best. It's not possible any longer. I would say that the populists would never have the chance if we did our work much earlier in the right way. I think Angelica, when she summed up what our report, Sustainable Equality, is about, were very, very smart and correct and precise. What can engage people today is that they feel when we explain what we should do, that we are, number one, more radical in our approach than we have been before, because the problems are so radical as we have never seen them together for many, many years. We have a massive climate problem, we have a massive social problem, we have a massive injustice problem, and we have a massive inequality problem, right? We have never, since the Second World War, had all the major problems together so massively increased as we have right now. So the reality called for radical change, and we are the only ones who are ready to take the consequences. Number one, as Angelica has said, we have to reshape capitalism. We have to take the consequences that it was not ordinary people or youngsters who created the financial crisis in 2008. It was the financial system in itself. It was greediness combined with a wrong, unregulated financial system. Number two, we have been witnessing the wrong economic policy in the past 10, 15 years. Look at the unemployment situation in Southern Europe. Look at the youngsters in Spain, in France, in Italy, all over the place. This is not a nature of law. It's a political consequences of a right-wing political development for many, many years. Unsolved problems and right-wing and greediness policy, that's what it is. So the substance to convince that something has to be done, it is already there. And I think the message is, listen, if you feel something is wrong when you go to school, or you try to go to school, or you try to ask for a job and you're not getting it, then you should know you are not alone, and things will not be solved if we're not ready to take the consequences on the fight.
Thanks a lot. What Kathleen didn't tell you about me is that for some time, and it's still in my resume, official resume, I was the special advisor to Poul Nyrup Rasmussen when he was the leader of the European Socialist Party. So I also have my credentials. You're too young, far too young. So, very briefly, when I was young, sort of your age, sustainability was green. Now that I'm getting older, I'm glad that sustainability is getting red, or let's say pink, depending on where exactly you sit on the wide spectrum of social democrats. And the reason for that is, I think, very simple, is that we learned by doing that sustainability has to be multi-dimensions. It is an ecological issue, and as Paul just said, we have to seriously review, rethink, reshape the model of global market capitalism we live in. It has an economic dimension, and what Paul just said about the 08 crisis shows that if global finance is poorly regulated, that's a bomb for the rest of the planet, and that's what happened in 08, and we're still paying, many people are still paying the shock, and of course it is a social issue. So we cannot distinguish anymore, I think, between environmental sustainability, social sustainability, economic sustainability, which is why this notion of climate justice has little by little surfaced as a big motto, which I think should be top of our and your policy agenda for the future. Now, that's not the only way youngsters, citizens, consumers, workers can ensure that our planet goes back to a sustainable path. There is the policy dimension, there is a big, coherent, party-driven platform that links programs with one another, but there is a lot to be done by yourself. And I just want to take one example on which I'm working. I'll be flying to China later tonight to try and move this issue with the Chinese authorities, which is a project which is called Antarctica 2020, which, by the way, was showcased by another member of this coalition in the European Parliament 2 days ago. Antarctica, as you know, not Arctic, Antarctic, the other one, the one down deep under, is a large continent covered with ice, with snow. With climate warming, the ice and the snow are melting. This softens the waters around the Antarctic, and thus it harms the marine population, which is in the sea around, which is krill, which are these very little things which the rest of the population eat. Krill is the upstream of the food chain, both within the ocean and on the shores. Krill disappears, hence damaging the whole food chain in the oceans, hence damaging the whole food chain with, all these penguins, which are so nice on pictures. The solution is very simple. We have to stop fishing around the Antarctic. Stop fishing around the Antarctic in order to limit the damage of global warming. Stop fishing seems to be something very easy. I'm in favor of stop fishing, let's stop fishing. The problem is that Antarctic is governed by a sort of gas factory of a lot of diplomats and science people, and 25 countries have to agree on doing anything.
It's like Europe then.
Including, Europe is a space vessel compared to the governance of the Antarctic, which is medieval. In order to do that, we need a consensus by the countries that administer the Antarctic, including, for instance, China and Russia, who, for a variety of reasons, do not want. I'm convinced that if we succeed in creating the necessary political pressure, including within China and within Russia, this can be done. Now, it's not winning an election, it's not making a campaign, it's engaging on very specific targets that have to do with sustainability issues which everybody understands. I could do the same on plastics, and I'm trying to do something on plastics in Tunisia, for instance, which is a country which is horribly littered with plastic everywhere. We could do the same with meat or with fish. So this example, just to give you my strong feeling that you can engage in politics, you have to think things globally, coherently, but you also have to do that individually. Choose your coalition, but build one of these and engage in it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one question in this workshop team, and then we go on to the next. Who has a question on the relationship inequalities and what the panelist just said? Over there, please.
Hello, is this, yeah, okay, it's this one. I think that the environmental movement is, it's obviously very complex, and there's lots of different ways of being environmental, or different environmental issues, so plastic, pollution, I don't know, the list could go on, and they all require really different solutions. So, you know, where does that thinking happen, and who do you have to advocate on your part to find solutions to all of these different problems? Oceans would be another one. I don't know, it could go on and on. Yeah.
Who do you have to advocate?
Well, can you push your yeah. Right. I was just thinking on the way you posed your question, because taking the problems in the oceans, taking the plastics and the other separate questions in a whole bunch of questions within the environmental threats, right? I think it's not a problem of finding organizations who invest all their lives on voluntary basis to try to grapple it. There's a lot of investments and a lot of engagements in the plastic thing. And so you can mention all these different elements in the whole concept of creating sustainability and fixing the climate change. What I'm trying to say is that, you know, we will not get it done unless we do something else at the same time. Let me tell you that if you think of the carbon side and the oil side, right? Two resources which human beings have created the industrial societies on for hundreds of years now. The real threat to the climate is CO2, right? And to try to get that one under control alongside with the ocean thing is focusing on a major contradiction between, number one, fixing the climate, and number two, doing it in such a way that it's fair, right? So to come from point A now to point B, where the problems are solved on the climate side, is a very complex thing if you want to avoid that those who pay the price for doing that will be poor people. That will be them who live in the most dangerous parts of the world, right? That will be those who have precarious jobs or are jobless. If you take Poland, for instance, today here, why are Poland saying, well, it's difficult for us to solve the carbon problem because it's a major resource in their country, right? And thousands of people are employed in the coal industry in Poland. I'm just saying that the reason why we are saying in our report here, which was mentioned before, you know, power to the people, enabling change and justice, transition, I would say that is why you need to have tools which ensure people that they will get a new job before you start on the transition period. Can you see it? Up till now, we have said, a majority of politicians somewhere, let's close the mines. Huh? Then let's close the oil, right? And in France, you saw that Macron, he was saying, let's increase the tax on some types of cars, without thinking of ordinary people who have to transport themselves each day and are spoiling their economy. You can see why we say you can't do the one without doing the other. So when we're talking about the ice caps on the north and south of this planet, or we're talking about CO2 reductions to ensure the climate, every time you have to solve the social problems at the same moment and not afterwards. I mean, this is time also to learn from our experience. Why are the populists now so strong all around, right? Because they try to tell a lie to people saying, well, let's close the borders and let's solve the problems ourselves within our nation side and nothing else, right? Giving the people that, as you and I know, it's a lie, because alone the climate is cross-border and all we have been talking about is. But that's one thing, but the other thing is, the reason why the populists are getting so much attention now is that we forgot, not we, but the right-wing side, who have had the majority for a very long time, they forgot to realize that if you want to solve the climate problem and the nature problem, you have to do it at the same time with the social thing, and they didn't, you see? So that is our challenge. That's why we have to do it in that way now.
Thank you very much, Paul. We need to speed up, so we go to the next. Hi, Claire, have a seat. Before we go to the next workshop, I would like to welcome Claire Nouvion. Claire is a French environment activist, but also journalist, a television producer, a film director, and an organizational leader. That's a lot. Welcome, Claire. If it's okay with you, I just go into the second, because I have to speed up a little bit, into the second workshop, and then you're the first to respond on the second workshop, and that is to go beyond GDP. And if I'm right, I have Yande Chi. Yeah, so sorry. Better that you say your name yourself before I make awful mistakes. Have a seat. Yande. That's correct, isn't it? Yeah, right. Beyond GDP, that's a difficult one, huh?
Yeah, no, don't worry. Nobody ever pronounces my name correctly. I'm used to it. So yeah, firstly, we'd like to say thank you to Tanya and Enrico for what was a really insightful, thoughtful, and really quite challenging debate. So in our workshop, we were essentially questioning the relevance of GDP as a primary measure of social progress. I think we all know that within political discourse of how well our countries are doing, GDP is what is foregrounded. So there was rather general consensus that we shouldn't foreground GDP. It doesn't speak to the social and the environmental realities of the world and of the countries where we live. So this includes everything from the vast inequality of 26 people having more money than the bottom half of the world, and the sort of environmental catastrophe that we're currently experiencing. So, yeah, given that this is the case, the next challenge for us politically is that what does an alternative vision of framing social progress look like? So, I mean, I pose this question to the panelists as well as everybody who is in this room. And there were some of us who didn't believe in social measurement necessarily in the most technocratic sense. And that was, I guess, the contention, and a lot of people did disagree. But so taking it forward, and I mean, given that we agree that we need to measure social progress somehow, we discussed some considerations that as a progressive family we really should think about in taking this forward. So for one, it's the idea that data is powerful. So the reason why we foreground GDP is that Theresa May can stand up and say, well, the United Kingdom is doing absolutely brilliantly, but 40,000 children are being plunged into poverty. So moving forward beyond GDP and considering that it's about a framing issue, and I'm posing this question to the panelists, how do we move forward?
Excellent question for Claire to begin.
Gosh, that's a hard one, sorry. First, I wanted to apologize to have arrived late. Second, I wanted to say I was really happy to be here. And I hope I can produce some sort of inspiration, but I'm not that sure. I usually depress everyone when I speak, and I get chased, like, stop talking. People really want to just jump out the window. And then I'm thinking we've got the Extinction Rebellion, we've got young people, you know, going on strikes for climate. And I'm starting to see hope, somehow. I mean, I've lost complete hope for humanity. And then in the last year, I started to build hope again, thinking, wow, if young people actually wake up and they demand change, then maybe something's going to happen. Because this is the last generation that can do the trick, that can save the world. Nothing less than that. So, yeah, where do we go from here? Well, we go towards responsibility at each individual level, at collective level, at political level, and at economic level. There's nothing else we can do. And that means we need to be a lot more demanding with ourselves and with our communities and with our elected officials. And they need to take moral, historic responsibility for this very specific time, which has never occurred in our lifetime and not even in the history of humankind on this planet. So, yeah, the answer for me stays with one word, which is responsibility. And that goes together with honesty, with courage. And I think courage, even if you had to break it down to one word, that would be courage. Because bravery, being able to, you know, see reality, see facts, see the world as it is, believe in its reality, of course, unlike others across the pond. You know, believe in the reality of the world and act upon it. So that's just an introduction. But then I can go on forever. I mean, it depends on, yeah.
Not allowed.
Yeah, okay.
We'll come back to it. But thank you for that, because it's exactly the feeling that I have the last couple of weeks when we saw these youngsters marching in Brussels and later in Antwerp and then Charleroi and in Rotterdam and Amsterdam and you saw these young women and men speaking out loud, asking for action now. So I feel the same. So it's good to be a little bit hopeful. But in the sense of having the courage, we also need the courage to make structural change. And in that sense, going beyond GDP, and I'm looking to Pascal now, going beyond GDP, we've been talking about that for a decade at least. But we haven't changed the GDP. It's still the one and only way to measure our wealth and our progress. Is there hope?
You're absolutely right. We all agree that as it is today, the GDP, which is the most used measure of economic growth, is the wrong metric. And one of the reasons why it's the wrong metric is that a lot of prices which are used to compute, calculate the GDP are not representative of their real price for the planet, starting with carbon, which we know is the big issue. Now, if there was some sort of real carbon price, a part of the problem would be solved. I'm not saying the whole part of the problem will be solved, because there are lots of things like loss of biodiversity, for instance, which is not accounted in the way the GDP is constructed, but that would go a long way. And there are now other sort of proposals which are not to measure GDP as such. You leave it as it is for the moment, but you add to that a measure of how much we improve or damage the planet. So you build another metric, which is to be used besides the traditional one, which is an indication of whether or not we are depleting or increasing the resources of the planet. No doubt, for the moment, the number would be that we deplete, we damage the planet. So that's one solution. There's another one in what we just heard, which is why don't we have a metric for social well-being, for social justice? There are some. If you look for good numbers on this, there are at least 3-4 think tanks. including the ones that the UNDP uses to calculate its own index of how humanity is faring. So this is something which exists. But true, so far, the main measurement, the one that people use in political campaigns to show that they've been doing well and that the opposition has not been doing well, or that the opposition say they haven't done well, is in using a fake number. And I think this notion that it's a fake number is something, again, you probably could help putting on social networks. After all, you know, fake some things are a fashion, for reason that the #1 guy on this planet is using it every day, every morning. So it can be done. Let's try and assess the GDP as a fake number.
Well, it's one of the issues we're working on as well in sustainable equality. Do we have a concrete proposal?
Yes, we have actually, and I would add to your question to us. Start by showing how absurd the GDP as a measure is. I mean, if you have an accident out there when two cars are hammering together and one person is dead, then the GDP is increasing, right? Because you have to repair these cars, and the employment for repairing them is an add value and things of that absurd kind, right? When you have done that, then what we're doing here, just to very shortly, Kathleen, you know, friends, here you have an economic political cooperation which says that if a member country here, among the 27, 28 members of the European Union, have a deficit on their public budgets, then it's wrong, right? Really wrong. And then you have to make cuts in your education, social services, and all that kind of stuff. Here we are saying now, in this report here, it's time for change and reform. We are saying you cannot measure how a state is like this GDP only. You have to look at the inequality. You have to look at the climate thing. What are they doing on all these 5 fundamental issues? So here we are proposing, as Kathleen said, when the European Union's Council want to make a direction change for a member country, then they should know and not any longer just look at the deficit, but look at how are you performing on employment, on youngsters' education, on climate, and all the different in one and the same basket. And what we have done in this report, friends, all of you should read it, is to make a new combination of measures which goes together in one direction, right? And that means that if you have a deficit in one country, and the reason to the deficit is that they have invested a lot in the shorter run in climate, right? Then the Council should say to the member state, okay, you're on the right track. You will have surplus a little bit later on, but because it's a part of the new strategy. Can you follow me? So that's what we're going to do now.
Wonderful. I have room for one question in this workshop on GDP, or a little bit elaborated on that. No questions? Yes, over there.
So, as we know, it has moved from being an option to a possession of politics nowadays, GDP, unfortunately. And what I would really like to know is we as progressives, as social democrats, besides our agenda that we have set, how do we plan to take actions, the 28 member countries, to prevent it and maybe to address this problem, that is, because GDP has clearly become a problem nowadays. So do we really have a plan to prevent it, or to have a new way to measure and to define progressive again? That's it.
Paul, very
Thanks.
short.
Yeah, we have a very concrete plan, my friend, very concrete. So after the European election, right, promise me to go out there and vote for progressives at the European election, right? Unfortunately, not all of you can, but those of you who can, go and vote for us, right? Because we have this plan here, which means that if we are getting a majority together with the Greens and other parties in the European Parliament, then we will on day one begin to introduce this new strategy I mentioned before, which means that we are saying from day one no to judge a member nation alone on the GDP, and yes to judge it on what are you doing on inequality, what are you doing on climate, and so on. Can you follow me? So this strategy we just mentioned here in the report, which is a very concrete plan, will be implemented if we are getting the majority. So please, help us.
That's about radically change Europe. I go into the next workshop, and that is financing the transformation. At the end, in political life, that's what we need, is money. I have Malte Müller. Ah, there you are.
So yeah, we were actually talking about how we're going to finance all the transformational processes we're faced with. And we first talked about how taxation within the European Union actually works and how, for example, corporations are taxed within the European Union. And one of the first things we looked at is that since the 1970s, the corporate tax rates have been going down globally and in Europe as well. And that at the current moment we're faced with a situation within the European Union, but also globally, where there are loads of tax havens. We touched upon some within the EU, for example, the Netherlands, and some outside of the EU. And then we also talked about, of course, tax evasion being a huge problem, and all these, so below taxation of corporations, the tax evasion schemes that are being pulled off by companies, especially by globalized big companies, and other measures lead to a decrease of public financing. So if we would actually pull through with the taxation we have in place at the moment, we would have a lot more money to spend to invest within our economy, to grow new jobs, to grow, to implement new educational systems and so forth. So that was an issue we were talking about. Another issue we talked about is whether our taxation of income is actually fair, and whether we should talk about taxing higher incomes more radically, like, for example, Ocasio-Cortez has proposed in the US. And that actually the economic mainstream at the moment is saying, well, yes, that's actually not that radical of a proposal to do. So the question is, why aren't we implementing these higher taxes within the European Union at the moment, and also on the national levels within the European Union? And then another thing we talked about is whether taxation of income is actually the right thing to do, because inequalities aren't not solely produced through the difference between high and low income, but often wealth in general produces more money than income could ever do. So whether we should talk about, instead of taxing income, we should talk about taxing wealth in general. Another interesting thing that was presented to us was also possibilities of new forms of taxation. So, well, at first we were talking about the standard forms of taxation we know and we've been used to in the last decades. There are new fields where we could implement taxes. For example, taxation of data, taxation like in form of a digi-tax or a European digi-tax, digitalization tax, and how we could use the money we earn there to support a sustainable development within the European Union. And connected to that, we also talked about how the topic of taxation is actually referred to sustainable development within the European Union. And we asked ourselves whether it is possible through certain taxation methods, measures, and tariff systems to actually get people to be more environmentally friendly, to act in a manner and sense that would support a sustainable development within the European Union, but also on a global scale. So we've got a taxation system that is not really supporting sustainable development at the moment. And we were thinking about whether, for example, through taxation of resources, through taxation of plastics, what you've also been talking about already, whether that might be measures we could implement to support a sustainable development. Yes, I think I've touched upon some of the things we talked about, and I don't want to keep on rambling here, so I guess the floor is yours again.
Claire.
Well, thank you for raising a lot of points that are quite dear to my heart, because it feels that our economic logic is sick. It's just exactly the opposite of what it should be. We should be, and we should have no higher goal than to preserve what makes life possible and our life possible on the planet. And the taxation system that you've talked about, but also the subsidies, the public money, which is thrown into the economy, actually fuels in many, many areas the direct destruction of the planet. And I do not resist to, of course, especially having Pascal Lamy at this table, to address the point of fisheries subsidies. Also because it's high on the agenda of this European Parliament. You have a plenary vote, one of those last plenary votes before the Parliament breaks, in the week of the 1st of April. And we really hope that it doesn't turn into a massive April Fool's Day. But we have a fisheries committee made up of 27 MEPs in this Parliament, which looked at a regulation proposal from the Commission on the next fund, European Maritime Fisheries Fund, which is more than 6 billion euros. And those billions are going to drive directly whether we choose to destroy or to preserve the environment. And if we manage to preserve the environment, of course, we then manage to preserve the fishing jobs. Unfortunately, the Fisheries Committee voted, by and large, that those subsidies, which directly led to the destruction of fish stocks, of the marine environment, and of jobs, these subsidies were public money that was thrown to build boats, right? But we have so many fishing boats right now that we have this massive chronic overcapacity issue. And it's been shown by experts. The WTO has talked for 20 years, and those talks, Pascal Lamy would know extremely well, because he had rounds and rounds of negotiations on this issue of harmful, pervert fisheries subsidies which fuel overfishing and overcapacity. 20 years ago, those talks started at the WTO. Then in 2015, the UN adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, and you would know that the SDG 14 is a very ambitious goal for the ocean, which seeks to restore the marine environment and make sure that jobs can be created or at least preserved if we manage to have the fish in the water. And one of these subset targets, 14.6, says that you should eliminate all harmful fisheries subsidies by 2020. The EU, as we know, was really quite active in making sure that those SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, were adopted at the UN. And then we have the EU, which has a mandate to negotiate in the WTO right now to make sure that the negotiations which were prompted again in the WTO would reach the goal, and actually that goal to end all harmful fisheries subsidies by 2020. And right now we've got a fisheries committee which voted to reintroduce harmful fisheries subsidies which fuel the construction of fishing boats, although those typical subsidies, those harmful ones, are right now prohibited in the EU. So we had shown the way forward to the world by showing that, yes, we have a huge overcapacity problem. We have too many boats. Everybody knows that. And so the EU, as of 1st of January 2005, had said, we're no longer going to use public money, tax money, workers' money, our wealth, to produce those conditions by which we destroy the world. So we showed the way forward, and now we've got this horrible signal coming from the Fisheries Committee. So of course, I'm really counting on the progressive group to make sure that we fight destructive subsidies. We have a specific case, but which is also a very interesting case to show that there is such a disconnect sometimes between the political world and the reality, and we understand why. We've got very established lobbies that come and talk, and they make sense. They produce arguments that make sense. And we've got in front of them no artisanal fishers constituted as a lobby. So we've only got NGOs to step in the room and say, please, just, let's balance these views. And let's make sure there are jobs and fish for everyone, but that's not the way forward. So I think the fisheries subsidies example is a really good one to show that what we have to do is, whether it be having the courage to actually fight tax havens, but also to turn around the taxation and subsidy logic of our economy to make sure that they are not harmful, but encouraging, that they actually do encourage the preservation of what should be most dear to us. Big program.
Thank you very much, Claire. I feel a little bit lobbied now.
By citizens?
Yeah,
by fish?
No, but I completely agree with you. Maybe I should explain. I'm the Vice President for Sustainability, but I don't have fisheries and agriculture in my portfolio. I have transport, I have energy, I have industry, I have environment, climate, but it's always a little bit like that. Agriculture and fisheries always get a little bit around it, but I'm alarmed. We'll take it up by the vote for the plenary session. But very, very important. I actually completely agree. I always emphasize not only the taxation, but also the subsidies on fossil fuels, but also in agriculture and so on. So I completely agree. Pascal, do you want to add something on? I want to step up, but I want also everybody to give time to react on a very important subject.
No, on fish, I couldn't agree more. I was the one, when I was European Trade Commissioner, who succeeded in having this inserted in the WTO agenda. It's true that it's nearly 20 years ago. The problem being, of course, that, once more, this is a global issue. Nobody will really dare to suppress harmful subsidies if your neighbor doesn't do it, because they're fishing in the same waters. Yes. And so we have a situation where roughly 2/3 of the planet is moving in this direction, but China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, just to name a few, India, Russia, are resisting what needs to be done globally. And that's a situation where, again, the only solution is political pressure coming either from the top, sort of G7, G20, or coming from the bottom, which is what Claire is doing most of her time. One word on a similar topic which was mentioned, which is corporate taxation. It's true that within the Union, corporate taxation is lower than it was 20 or 30 years ago, and that stems from the fact that European companies are competing with others on global markets, and that elsewhere taxes on corporates are low. Even in the European Union, after, well, the internal market was launched in 1985, even after such a long time, we do not have in the European Union a harmonized tax base or tax rate. We cannot do it within the European Union. So thinking you can do it at the level of the world when we cannot do it at the level of the Union. So for the moment, this will not happen. What is happening, and this is one of the positive effects of the 2008 crisis, is that at last there is a global, international effort to address tax evasion within the G20. It's too slow, it's not perfect, but it's the first time that the thing has come to the fore, and it's true that there are many ways for big multinational companies to locate their profits where they are lowly taxed and to put a lot of expenditures where tax on profit is high. This is starting to be addressed, so this is something which we favor. But it's true that you needed at the time the crisis, and notably the one that were opposing this internationally, US and UK, who vehemently opposed tax harmonization for many years around the table, the G7, the G20. They changed their mind because they needed money for the crisis. So
I want to keep on track and give everybody equal time. And that is just transition, also very important in the sustainability agenda. And I ask Flavia, Gabriela Sandu.
Is it working? Okay. Wow, it's intimidating up here. Okay, so in our workshop, we were separated into groups. Each one had to answer one question. For the first question, it was, how can we put pressure on politicians to take climate action now? What we came up with, well, first we have to make them care. What do politicians, all of them, generally care about? Well, getting elected. How do they get elected? They have to convince people that they're going to do something for them. And here is where the bottom-up effect comes. If the majority of the population wants climate action, then the political class better start getting it done, if they want another mandate at least. Next, we're also discussing that maybe if we cannot convince the old political class about changing their opinions when climate action, then maybe we should replace them with grassroots politicians who are connected to their communities and who are going to do less talking and more action. Don't take it as an offense. As for the second question, well, we were asked how can you think of implementing some measures for this just transition. It has already been touched upon. We are all agreed that people should be the core of this transition. They should not be left behind, the people who work in coal mines or other polluting industries that will be affected by a green transition. And we agree that with a change of the market, a greener market creates new opportunities and new jobs. The jobs will not be the problem. The problem will be that we will need to re-educate these people to fit other jobs. This is one way where we could help them. And also we had been thinking about allocating funds for local and regional small businesses and initiatives related to environmental action, maybe a EU Green Fund. And I'm going to conclude now. What has been the general trend of the discussion? Well, we progressive have to be more radical, much more radical than we are now. People are angry, people are tired of talking, so much talking, and we need to take action now, something much more than we've done before. And well, while we are doing this, we should also do it with a well-thought, concrete plan, because, well, if it's something that people hate more than empty words, is preventable crises. So that's all from me, I guess.
Thank you very much, Flavia. And I first give the floor now to Paul.
Well, I would say that the just transition is a political matter of the highest importance, because if we don't do it right, then it will not happen, you know. And the difference between the right side and the progressive side of ours is that they try to repair things for people after the problems have occurred. And that means that after they have been closing the mines here and there and have made the changes and observed that someone is losing their jobs and someone are really having kids which cannot go to school any longer because they cannot afford it, then they begin to think maybe we should do something. The heart now in the just transition, as you said, Gabriella, that is that we need to plan things on beforehand as an integrated part of the move from now to a sustainable situation, right? And we need to ensure that the money are there, that the jobs will be there, that the education and skill and research are at place as an integrated part of the just transition. I would say that we have done it in part of the Nordic Scandinavian countries, and that leads me to the second point, which I call a trap, you could say. Each time when I talk with right-wing politicians in governments, they say, well, Paul, we agree, yeah, we agree, yeah, and taxation, oh yes, and whitewashing, it should be closed and stopped. But you know, we cannot do it in Europe alone. We need to do it globally, and first when we have done it globally, then we can do it. I would warn you against this trap, because we know, as we have seen on fishery, which Claire explained to us, we know that we are closing our eyes in Europe on how much we can do as a starter, right? As a front runner. We have the world's biggest single market, and it's so attractive for business that they want to stay and be here, which means that if we introduce a minimum taxation on corporate taxation, if we introduce a taxation of IT giants, they don't pay taxes, but we know how much they are selling, and we could tax 3% of how much they're selling. You see the point. The single market of Europe is so strong economically that we can use it to the benefit of the transition and to the benefit of ordinary people. Because the argument from business and the lobbyism is, oh, if you do something alone in Europe, people and investments and business will go away. No, they will not. They will stay because they earn their money here. But they will earn it on a more fair basis than they have done before. And that goes for just transition, that goes for taxation. And Claire is right. If we could make a fishery policy in Europe, they would not fly away. They would stay, because at the end of the day, I think we can boil it down to saying, now it's about ensuring that the market is the servant of people and not the master of people. Right.
Claire?
Thank you, Gabriella. I thought it was very inspiring. And also, I have to make a point, because I have to make it every time. Every time people talk about, putting pressure on anything, whether it be politicians or markets or market actors, for climate action, I'm always like, how about biodiversity? Because, it's a great thing that we've got our focus on climate. But there's also another huge crisis, which is the extinction rate of anything alive on this planet. And so, studies are just falling down every day. All these pieces of research showing that we're in deep trouble. And I really want to make a very specific point about that, because when you look at climate, we need to take radical action. Today, everything needs to be radical, of course. Radical doesn't mean that we're going to do another revolution. The revolution is in our mind and our ecological, and economic systems. But we really need to have in mind that whatever we do, more or less, for the climate is going to be feeling really depressing when the rest of the world doesn't follow. Whereas, whatever we choose to do, to maintain biodiversity, to protect landscapes, to protect bees, to protect forests, whatever, we'll see the difference within just a few years. So you can do everything that's right for the climate, and yet you've got the emissions of other countries still rising. It feels so depressing. So the one thing, if we want to cherish a sense of progress, let's make sure we also pay a lot of attention and put a lot of pressure on public policies to protect nature, because then we're going to see the results. Then you're going to see the birds coming back in the fields, and bees and butterflies. And you're going to, first, we're going to have nice landscapes, which is good, so we don't have to spend money flying around the planet to see beautiful landscapes. We'll have them at home, and we can preserve them. Also, agricultural systems, all systems will be able to fend off. Especially, they need to become very resilient in the face of climate change anyway, right? So it's not an option. It's a long point, but I really want it anchored in your brains. Climate goes with biodiversity, and biodiversity, we can see the differences within very little time. So let's put all our weight behind biodiversity as well. And then, of course, I like the fact that, you know, you're thinking, how can we put pressure on politicians for, let's say, environmental action, so that we go with climate and biodiversity together. And if they don't want to change, then let's change them for grassroots politicians. I think that would be very healthy. I think not change everyone, you can't, but, you know, to introduce grassroots activists, you know, I'm not running for the election, by the way. I am, but the last on the list of a French list, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
Which one?
Place Publique, Socialist Party, Progressives. It's a dual list with a third small party. But I'm number 70, well, 9 or 4, we don't really know yet, right? But I'm last on the list, because I support this list. I don't want to come to this parliament, I love it, but I've seen it very much. I have had my share. But I'm really going to support this list, because it's going to be a mixture of old and new. And that's what works. And I think it's good and healthy for professional politicians to be at the contact of young people who go radical changes. That's what we demand. And of grassroots activists that are not going to change their minds once they've had lunch with Monsanto. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's very healthy to bring new blood, bring French blood. But also, I really think putting pressure on everyone is just normal. That's what we need. You know, no human being can be, you know, can be just a perfect figure of morality. Maybe a few, but let's not rely on that. Let's rely on systems that, you know, just promote transparency of decision-making processes. I believe in that much better than believing in, you know, people making discourses and then acting a bit differently once they have the power. So I think it's very healthy to demand transparency, traceability on votes, to try to understand what was voted, what was decided, how it was decided. I think we can increase transparency standards by far. Although I must say the parliament is really, can do better, for sure. It can do much better. And we saw that the EPP almost voted, you know, so that there would be no transparency, increased transparency standards with, you know, encounters with lobbies. So that was a close vote, but the parliament won. So increasing transparency, but also making sure that we, young and less young, pay a lot more attention to how public policies and decisions are made, so that we can exert our citizen pressure, for sure.
Super, thank you.
I finally have the name. Looks like the Oscar.
Okay, I now move to the last workshop, and that is a workshop on trade. And Aisha Traore, there you are. Thank you. Come up. Aisha, is that correct? Oh, super. Okay, you have the floor.
Language balance, I'm going to speak in French. If you... Merci. Bonsoir à tous. Parlant du commerce libre, nous nous sommes essentiellement penchés sur 3 questions. C'est à savoir de mettre l'être humain au milieu de tout ça. C'est bon, la traduction? OK, c'est de mettre l'être humain au milieu de tout ça. La planète, c'est d'abord nous. Alors, lorsqu'on parle de commerce libre, nous avons fait appel d'abord à la notion d'égalité. Alors, commerce libre, on se dit qu'il y a quelqu'un qui est fort d'un côté et une autre personne. C'est bon la traduction? C'est bon? Parce que tout le monde... C'est bon? Yeah. OK. Lorsqu'on parle de commerce libre, il y a la notion d'égalité qui est remise en cause parce qu'on se dit que d'un côté, il y a quelqu'un qui est fort et l'autre qui est faible. Alors, comment avoir un équilibre entre ces deux? Alors, nous, on compte. Alors, il y a les multinationales qui ne pensent qu'à produire tout le temps, à vendre, à écouler ce qu'ils ont, sans faire attention à la planète et sans prendre en compte les textes qui sont légalement mis en œuvre par l'Organisation mondiale de la santé et du commerce. Alors que c'est une organisation internationale qui a été régie pour ça et qui est là pour régulariser ce secteur. Alors, ne pas prendre en compte ces textes-là et aller, comme on le veut, sur des personnes qui n'ont pas les moyens aujourd'hui de se plaindre. Pour nous, il y a une question d'inégalité. Alors, nous proposons comme solution de mettre l'être humain au milieu de nos aspirations, de prendre en compte tout ce que la planète nous offre. Aujourd'hui, nous pouvons respirer parce que nous avons l'oxygène qui nous est transmis gratuitement par la planète, par la nature, par les arbres. Mais lorsque l'on est malade et que l'on part à l'hôpital et qu'on vous demande de payer 1 heure d'oxygène, ça c'est une question qui est très pratique. C'est vraiment difficile pour beaucoup de personnes. C'est beaucoup d'argent. Alors, c'est d'utiliser le commerce comme un moyen de se rendre des services et pas comme un moyen de guerre. Ce que nous voyons vraiment avec la Chine et beaucoup de pays d'Asie qui vont surtout en Afrique pour aller écouler ce qu'eux, ils ne veulent pas. Même certains pays de l'Europe aussi, si je peux me permettre de le dire, qui vont là-bas et qui ne font pas attention aux textes, qui ne font pas attention à tout ce qui a été établi juridiquement. Il y a aussi ces accords de commerce qu'on doit vraiment les revoir, les réviser pour prendre en compte l'aspiration de tous. Alors, il y a aussi la question des ressources minières, de tout ce qui est déforestation, des droits des minorités et surtout les peuples indigènes. Nous nous sommes penchés là-dessus. C'est-à-dire, ce sont des peuples qui sont là, qui ont les forêts. Il y a vraiment beaucoup de déforestation. Ce n'est pas un refus de ne pas vouloir coopérer, mais c'est vraiment d'avoir des accords qui prennent en compte les aspirations de tous, qui ne font pas que quelqu'un ou une partie empiète sur la liberté de l'autre, vraiment. Et là, il y a aussi la question de la jeunesse qui est revenue, c'est-à-dire que la jeunesse prenne sa responsabilité, qu'on ne s'assoit pas là et qu'on attende. On voit que maintenant, il y a la génération climat qui est là, ce qui est une très bonne initiative qui est à encourager. On sent que la jeunesse veut jouer un rôle, que la jeunesse veut s'impliquer. C'est de vraiment progresser avec ça et avec des idées bien sûr socialistes et progressistes, c'est aller de l'avant, continuer avec ça. On n'est vraiment pas le futur. Ça, c'est une question qui revient très souvent, que la jeunesse est le futur, mais elle est d'abord le présent. Elle doit s'attaquer aux problèmes du présent pour ensuite préparer le futur pour aussi les jeunes générations qui sont à venir. Alors, je veux terminer ma présentation avec cette phrase de Gandhi qui nous dit que la planète nous donne tout déjà. C'est vraiment à nous de savoir nous en occuper et d'en prendre soin. Je vous remercie.
Aïcha, merci beaucoup et sans doute, toi, tu es la preuve que la jeunesse est la future, je pense. Voilà, Pascal.
On va continuer en français. Je vois d'ailleurs qu'il y a très très peu d'entre vous qui ont besoin des écouteurs. C'est une très bonne nouvelle pour la francophonie. Alors, celles et ceux d'entre vous qui s'intéressent à cette question, en gros de savoir si l'ouverture des échanges, c'est bon ou pas bon pour les objectifs qui sont les nôtres, de croissance soutenable, de justice sociale, je pourrais faire un très long exposé sur la question. Procurez-vous sur le site de la FEPS, la Fondation des partis européens progressistes, un texte très récent sur lequel nous avons travaillé depuis 2 ans et qui fait un certain nombre de propositions sur ce qu'on pourrait appeler une politique commerciale plus progressiste pour l'Europe. C'est un sujet très compliqué, le rapport est assez long, mais il y a maintenant des propositions très claires, dont nous espérons d'ailleurs que les partis progressistes s'inspireront pour la campagne des européennes. En très gros, est-ce que l'ouverture des échanges, c'est bien ou pas bien pour nos objectifs? La réponse, toute simple, est en 2 mots, ça dépend. Bon. Alors je reconnais que répondre ça dépend, ça ne nous met pas forcément sur la bonne piste, mais par exemple, il est évident que selon que le carbone reçoit un prix qui représente son coût réel ou pas, les échanges internationaux vont être différents. Il serait normal qu'on mette un prix du carbone, disons quelque part entre de l'ordre de 100 € la tonne. Hein, il y a des gens qui disent que c'est moins, d'autres qui c'est plus. Et si on faisait ça, alors les raisons que les pays ont d'échanger des biens, éventuellement des services, changeraient et les flux s'orienteraient vers des systèmes de production qui sont moins dommageables pour l'environnement, puisque à partir du moment où vous payez le vrai coût du carbone, si vous ne faites pas de profit, eh ben vous allez vous mettre ailleurs. Ça, c'est une première direction. Encore une fois, il n'y a pas un prix global du carbone. Il y a des morceaux de prix du carbone selon les continents, selon les pays, selon les systèmes qu'on utilise pour donner un prix au carbone. Est-ce que c'est une taxe? Est-ce que c'est un système de permis d'émission? Je ne rentre pas dans les détails. Et puis, il y a une deuxième proposition, qui est assez claire, qui consiste à ce que les règles du commerce international, et elles sont établies et administrées effectivement par l'Organisation mondiale du commerce, reconnaissent la capacité des pays à, par exemple, discriminer, c'est-à-dire traiter plus favorablement des importations dont l'empreinte carbone est meilleure et plus défavorablement des produits dont l'empreinte carbone est défavorable. On peut faire la même chose. Je suis d'accord avec Claire quand elle a dit tout à l'heure, moins, on doit pouvoir discriminer, traiter différemment des biens agricoles dont on fait le commerce, selon ou non qu'ils sont plus ou moins favorables à la dégradation des sols. Donc, c'est dans cette direction qu'il faut aller. Il n'y a pas de réponse tout blanc, tout noir. Il faut que les pays qui commercent aient la capacité d'aligner leur système de production, d'abord de biens, mais aussi de services, parce que les services sont aussi consommateurs de biens environnementaux. Et il y a là un certain nombre de propositions pour aller dans une direction qui est assez différente de celle qu'on a connue au cours des 20 ou 30 dernières années.
Merci beaucoup, Pascal. Claire, do you want to add something? Oh, ajouter quelque chose?
But if you give me the floor, you know, I'm always going to use it.
I noticed that, but we slightly come to an end. Maybe I should take a few questions.
Yeah, I wanted to just make a statement on the fact that the EU is negotiating, of course, free trade agreements, and we have a high on our agenda issue with the ISDS, you know, the Investor State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, and that it's difficult to talk and touch on trade without talking about this major issue, which for me feels like the biggest threat after surveillance, by cyber surveillance, because basically if we give away our justice, you know, and to private investors that can go directly into a negotiation and arbitrate that whatever legislation we take thereafter, after the agreement was signed, then everything we can do or we want to legislate about to protect our environment or our health, they can attack us, they can sue us, and they can extort money from our systems. That is so wrong.
But you do know that the Socialists and Democrats have tried to change it, and we go in some sort of right direction. Okay, I'm going to take a few questions. Quick question and answer. Maybe you just say to whom you address your questions. The young woman over there.
I don't know if this works. Hello, thank you for organizing all of this and all the rest. My question is, it's more of a remark at the start, but it's also, generally speaking, I feel like there's an ongoing fight between trying to achieve socialist or social democrat policies, but at the same time facing the tank of free market. And that's something that we discussed a lot in a workshop this afternoon, where, I mean, even when you were discussing it, you said that we have to be radical in terms of in terms of environment questions and climate change, but how can we be radical just in terms of climate change without being radicals in terms of all the other policies that need to go with changes in climate and people losing their jobs, for example. So we were talking about a green welfare state or Europe, and I think it's very important that we remind ourselves that, especially nowadays, being radical is not an option anymore, but it's a need, and in terms of climate change in particular.
Thank you very much. Paul.
Yeah, I think when you pose the question, how can we be radical let's take it in concrete terms on trying to taming the market, right? Because what you have seen and what we have seen in our longer life is that if you leave the market forces, economic profit maximization as guiding lines to itself, then you will have all the effects, which is unemployment, inequality, climate problems, and all of these kinds. So the market have no soul, it have no heart, it have no, you could say, identity, but the market can be used and is misused or used to the benefit of a few, and the many are the ones who pay the price. So the big challenge is again and again, and we have been in that center, you know, for the last 20 years or 30 years, where we have been active politically speaking. We can't do radical change now. And that's why I said before that to do radical change, you need to have a good analysis, which is robust, and you need to know the arguments, what you're talking about, and you need to create a majority to do it, right? But let's start just very shortly where I just mentioned it. We need to dare to take the consequences of very simple things. That the single market here in Europe is a very, very strong economic unity with a powerful market voice inside there. You know, we are trading and depending with the outer world just up to 1/10 or 15, 20% maximum of the European Union's economy. The rest we can fix ourselves. So the parameters of our, you could say, power are much stronger than we normally think of. Which means, two examples of how to tame the markets. Number one is the big companies have to behave, right? The IT companies, the big corporations, which some of your colleagues mentioned, have to behave. They have to make a corporate social responsibility. They have to respect the climate and changes and biodiversity, as it was mentioned. How do we do that? They have been talking about it so long as I can remember. They took nice words when they have the Davos meeting. They took nice words about how to do things good, but they don't do it in practice. How can we do it? That's where I come in with the market one more time. I think it's time to introduce a passport now, saying that each company, corporations, big one, with a turnover of, let's say, 500 million euros a year, right? It has to obtain a passport to come into the single market and sell products to you and me and others, right? But to come in, this passport should be a corporate social responsibility, which ensure, number one, that this company pay its taxes as it should do. Number two, that this company respect all the regulations as far as climate and environment protection is concerned. Number three, that it respect to treat people on their jobs and employment as it should do, and so on and so forth. So you see, we are combining regulating the market with changing the behavior of profit-based big corporations. Can you follow me? So by taming the market and by ensuring that the market should be yours and me and everybody, every human being's servant, is demanding, number one, that we know how strong we are at the end of the day in Europe. And number two, that we unite. And number three, that we take the decisions I just mentioned an example of. You can do it. We can do it. And it will be in our lifetime, at least in yours, but also in mine, I hope. Thank you very much.
I hope also in mine. Next question. Over there.
Thank you. Filip Haska from the Czech Republic. I want to follow up on the previous question. It's a really simple question, and I ask for a simple answer. are you ready to build, or are you willing to build a socialist Europe? Because you are speaking about making the companies do something, follow the regulation and so on and so on. But socialism means that there will be no free market. And you have it in your name, so that's what I'm asking. Are you ready to build a socialist Europe, which will completely and radically change the environment and will tackle the climate crisis?
I'm going to take the liberty to answer that question. Thank you very much for that question. I'm going to be really very brief. We could have lengthy discussion about socialism and what it exactly means and so on and so forth. I want to give a twofold answer. First of all, it was like Paul Magnette explained yesterday, the difference between the market and capitalism. In our report, we say we want to reshape that capitalism into a completely other way of looking at it. In simple words, it means we have to leave capitalism and we have to rethink the market in a socialist way. Second, I'm a Democrat. Of course, I'm a Democrat. We are losing votes the last couple of years. We need to start winning elections again. Having said that, I can give you one promise. Normally, I have some experience in this parliament. Normally, after the elections, the parliament comes together, the two big groups start negotiating, and the main thing they're negotiating is who will be the chair, the president of the commission and the president of the parliament. We will not do that anymore. Well, as long as I have something to say in the group. We will not start by negotiating who will be chief of what. We will start first negotiating on what should be the working program, the program as such of the next commission. And it's been said before and again, all in this report, one of the crucial things that we need to change is what we call the economic governance. Get rid of the austerity politics, and the SDGs, it's been mentioned, I said it yesterday as well, but I want to repeat that, the SDGs, you could call them socialist development goal, because it's all about, it's what we want, the SDGs, that's what we want. That should be the frame of the next European Commission. And I'm not saying we will get all of that, but that will be the basic of what we will negotiate after the next European election. That is my promise to you. Sorry for taking over just for once. I take another question. And this one is for Claire. Yes, please.
Hello. Hi. I just wanted to be a bit provocative there, and because we talked a lot about taxation, of course, and we talk about the importance of setting things right, but we didn't really mention about changing our consumptions, and actually, because that's not very popular, is it? Just the whole debate about what we actually tax in people consumption, and we talked about like the meat and the fishing industries, and I'm sorry about bringing that back the topic, but I think that's something we don't really talk about, the fast fashion industry, the way we live our daily lives. And I had a look in the report, I just had it, so pardon me if it's there, but I couldn't find the mention there about like the impact of our daily consumption. Should we actually, and that's where I want to be a bit provocative about it, should we actually tax people consumptions, the things that we know that are bad for the environment? Should we be starting taxing meat, dairy, fashion? That's a kind of provocative, but I wanted to know what you think about it.
Yes, Claire, this is the final word. I give you the floor, and Paul, and then I conclude.
So this is, we're not going to have a concluding word. This is it.
This is it.
Okay, great. Thank you for that last question. Well, I think if you transform the whole, we talked about being radical. The word is associated with something which goes wrong, when actually what should be radical is our level of ambition, right? And that is not negotiable anymore. So if we're serious, if we're sincere about that, that means that we transform our production systems in a way that protect the environment as much as humans. That means if you take farmers today, most of them are extremely poor, including in Europe. In France, a farmer commits suicide one day out of, you know, how do you say, every other day, which is actually a social tragedy. We should only talk about that, right? Every other day, a farmer commits suicide because the systems of production, which are dictated by extremely powerful lobbies, as we now know, dictate that they're indebted, that they're struggling. So the food production system is made in a way that everything is abundant and cheap and cheaply produced, including human labor. So if we change that system to protect humans, decent living, good practice, then the whole price of food would be fair, especially, of course, animal protein. We just don't pay the right price for the right product. We have this consumerism attitude towards living things, which is completely not right. And so I think we need to reassess everything we do and we say and we think, and that's part of it. But so as a concluding, let's say, final word, I mean, if I were given 10 minutes, all right, kidding. No, okay, 1 minute, all right, so we'll talk afterwards. I'll give you the rest of what I wanted to say. But to cut it short, I think the world has split in two categories. People who believe in the tragedy that we're experiencing for a lot of us, especially in Africa and other poor countries, and those that don't believe in it or pretend it's not reality. For example, Exxon, they knew that climate change was going on, and yet they invested in awful, propaganda to delay the decision making, right? So politicians are just the same. Now we're going to see with this next legislature and the coming years, who believes in the moral duty and the historical sense of what is happening, the tragedy that we're faced with. And we're going to see, and that's where the responsibility lies. And so the only thing that we have as a horizon is that we've got a radical transformation to do so that our systems are compatible with the planet so that it still becomes and remains habitable, right? That's what we need to have, a habitable planet. And so our common horizon, whereas Europe was created because we had fascism, because we had war, because we had genocides, so peace was our common horizon. And then this major, beautiful project, Europe, became a vast space for trade and profits. Now our next common horizon is ecology. So ecology linked with humans. So my offer would be to drop our, let's say, common representation of what unites progressives to shift from social democracy towards social ecology. That's what I think we should be doing all together.
2 points. The one is about the market. It was the, look at me, my friend, number 1, 2, 3 wrote, you asked me, why don't we introduce socialism and say farewell to the market? Yeah, right? Oh, I would dream of doing that. I would like it. Can I say that? My point is that we had tried it once in the history, as you know. Some socialist countries have tried it. We have the Soviet Union as the main example. And I think it's telling us that the market is not an ideal mechanism at all. It have all its defaults of different kinds, but the market could be used to serve people. And we know a lot of examples of that. Can I take the Scandinavian countries where I myself come from? You can say that here you pay the highest taxes in the world. I can assure you, right? And you pay 25% in taxes on consumption also, right? And you have a big public sector which ensure that everybody is having same access to education for free, same access to healthcare for free, and a radical socialist-oriented taxation system. It's not perfect, but what we're doing, that's my message to you. What we're doing is we're saying we cannot afford waiting for heaven, right? where everybody is good at each other and we live in paradise. We need to act now, and we need to take the fight to the financial forces which are so strong and we are not back as we were before in earnings and living conditions. Who were to blame? That was the greediness and the financial powerful people. Who paid the price? You, my parents, my children and my grandchildren paid the price, and we had nothing to do with this crisis. So the job to be done now, that's not to dream for the better world without the market. The job to be done is to tame this market so that it will serve us on the conditions we as human beings defined, right? Otherwise, I could fear that take China, for instance, who is led by a communist party, but where do we have the communism? We have it in a dictatorship where they control people. But what do they use? They use the market. I'm not saying that this is for good. I'm just saying, please, let us not look away from the simple fact that using the market to the benefit of people, that's the way to go. If we say farewell to the market, we say farewell and are losing time to ensure that we are having this climate under control and that we are having our living conditions under control. The market have to serve us. Otherwise, it will be there and we will not succeed in slipping away with it. It will destroy us. So it's a fight against those who earn on our behavior, the market, and earn. And are the truth among the simple fact that 1% of the richest in the world own more than half of this planet's wealth, right? That's not fair, and it should be attacked directly. That's what we're going to do. It's not time to wait, it's time to act, and you have to tame those who will go another way than we would. Fairness and justice, and one last thing. What is the essence of being a socialist at the end of the day? In my world, it is that every human being counts. That every human being, just because it's a human being, have a right to have a decent future where everybody can work aside each other and have their happiness and their just and fair life. That's why we are socialists. And that's why we need regulation, taxation, and fairness, as we have been talking about today. Thank you.
Unfortunately, sorry, but you have to catch a bus. So voila. Let me start by thanking Pascal, who had to leave to save the world, convincing China. Claire of keeping up to the time, well, more or less. Paul of being the author of this wonderful book, did I say that before? Together with Luca, and being here and talking about it. But let me absolutely thank you. I have to say, we met yesterday, and today I say goodbye to all of you. These weeks in Parliament are not the easiest one. We are already looking at the forthcoming elections, but at the same time we are dealing with a lot of files to be ended up, and there's a lot of negative energy, but you gave me the positive energy that I need to go on the next couple of weeks and months and to go for that elections, and I hope you will be around. Please keep on track. Please ask us time and time again to act now, but please also engage yourself, whether it's in an NGO or in the corporate world or in politics. Please don't give up on that. Thank you so very much.